While it may not be the deepest or most complex game, Minecraft finds its potential in its simplicity. It's a vast, diverse world that you can change to your will, full of various creatures and creepers, which you can interact with however you like. But with such a massive menagerie of mobs, how do they stack up in terms of strength? Which of these piles of pixels possess the most potent powers, and which are the most brittle blockheads of the bunch? Hey guys, I'm Brad with One Up Binge, and this is Minecraft Mobs, Weak to Powerful. But before we can begin building this list, we have to start with the foundation. To start with, we'll only be looking at mobs that are currently in or are going to be in the game as of version 1.19 and can be found organically. This means that we'll not be looking at any mobs that are unused, removed, or were an April Fool's joke to begin with, even if their code still exists in the game to this day. Even then, this still leaves a sizable number of mobs left to cover, and we can't devote that much time to such simplistic creatures anyway. So, in the interest of time, we'll be grouping similar mobs together, even if there are substantial differences to them. With that said, let's get into our ranking. As usual, we'll be starting out with our weakest creatures and working our way to the most powerful mobs in the craft. Our gold medal weakness will go, unsurprisingly, to the bats. Widely considered to be the most useless mobs in the entire game, the only contribution bats have to the player experience is ambiance. They're passive, provide no benefit or hindrance to players or other mobs, and don't even drop anything when they're killed. Literally, the only thing they can do is hover one block above the ground, wander around aimlessly, and squeak occasionally. With nothing positive to say, we have to give the bats the title of weakest mob in Minecraft. The silver medal will be going to the turtles. For one thing, these things actually drop items and experience, so that alone puts them above the bats by default. And they can be used to create one of the most useful armor pieces in the game, simply by breeding them, which is another point in their favor. However, this is all held back by the fact that the game itself seems to hate them with a fiery passion. Just about every hostile and neutral mob in the game collectively decided that turtles were their arch enemies, and will go out of their way to attack them, their children, and their eggs. Those last two are what places these turtles this low, as in order to gain anything of value out of them, they require round-the-clock protection in order to successfully breed them. For that amount of investment in keeping these things away from, well, everything, means we can't place them any higher than this. For our bronze medal, we have a record 10-way tie with a group of animals we're calling the Surf and Turf Special, consisting of cows, sheep, pigs, rabbits, mushrooms, cod, salmon, tropical fish, squids, and glow squids. These animals rank together for one reason alone. None of them really do anything on their own. They each drop items on their death, usually food items, and the land-based animals can be bred to make more of them. But other than that, there's not a lot to talk about here. Cows and mushrooms have a slight edge due to producing milk, which can be used to remove effects, but this isn't enough to separate them from the rest. Also, pigs can be ridden with a saddle and a carrot on a stick, but this is more of a gimmick than a useful feature. Ultimately, none of these do anything significant to justify a separate ranking, so we have to place them here. Just missing out on the bottom three, we have the chickens narrowly avoiding the mass entry. Ostensibly, there isn't that much separating these bird brains from the animals we've just covered. However, there is one, admittedly superficial, feature which we feel edges the chickens that much higher in the ranking. That is the fact that they lay eggs, a throwing item that can be used as a weapon against other mobs. Because of this, chickens could, in theory, create their own supply of ammunition in order to fight back against anything that attacks them. This isn't a thing, mind you, but it is something that could happen, at least in concept. From one bird to another, our next spot goes to the parrots. While they don't have the same offensive potential as the chickens, parrots have a fair amount of defensive advantages. For one thing, they have the ability to fly, something which is surprisingly rare in this game. Only 7 other mobs in the game have actual flight, with other airborne creatures simply hovering over the ground. Additionally, they have the ability to detect other mobs up to 20 blocks away, regardless of obstructions, and farther away than most other mobs in the game. It does this by imitating the sound of said mob, thereby alerting others around it to the potential threat as well. That being said, they are still passive mobs, so they can't do much on their own, so we can't place them any higher than this. Besides, any creature that can be killed by the deadly force of a cookie was never gonna have a stellar placement on this list. Next, we have another group of mobs we're gonna call the Ride or Die package. These are the mobs that the player is capable of riding. aside from the pigs, which we've already covered. Horses, donkeys, mules, skeleton horses, and striders are the only real transportation mobs available. Striders have the same gimmicky control system as the pigs, which makes them annoying to deal with, but the ability to walk across lava gives them some actual utility. Of these 5, however, skeleton horses are the strongest, mainly due to how they spawn, but we'll get to that later. That being said, other forms of transportation such as boats, minecarts, and elytra are generally more reliable, so we can't place these much higher than this. P.S. For those of you currently typing in the comments to remind us about the zombie horses, ask yourself this: how exactly do you go about finding a zombie horse? We rest our case. Our next entry goes to the Allays. In addition to being able to fly, Allays' main contribution is their ability to carry items. Being able to hold up to a full stack of items, they're mainly useful as beasts of burden for transporting things and collecting from farms. Unfortunately, they don't have the ability to use the items they hold, and can only drop them in response to specific stimuli. So, while they are the most useful mobs thus far, they aren't that helpful in a fight. Still, the ability to fly gives them a defense advantage that gives them a slightly higher spot than they would have otherwise. We don't have a clever name for this group, so this next entry will be going to the frogs, cats, ocelots, and foxes, ranked in that order. From here on out, there are no more truly passive mobs, as every entry in this list is harmful to at least something else. In this case, the frogs will go after slimes and magma cubes, while the others mainly go after rabbits, chickens, and baby turtles. The frogs might also have a beef with the turtles too, we don't know. They aren't in the main game yet. Additionally, we have to acknowledge the fox's ability to not only hold an item in its mouth, but also use said item, allowing them to heal with a sweet berry or attack with a sword or other weapon. However, for the most part, they are ultimately still passive mobs, so we can't place them any higher than this. Next, we have the cutest mobs, the pandas. Being the first mob to be classified as neutral, pandas end up ranked this low mainly due to how inconsistent they are. They come in 7 different personality types: normal, lazy, worried, playful, aggressive, weak, and brown. And depending on their personality, their behavior and threat level can vary wildly. The normal, lazy, and brown pandas are fairly standard for neutral mobs, retaliating against the mob that attacks them, albeit only once and after a short panic session. However, the worried one acts more like a passive mob. The weak is only half as strong as the others, and the playful actually has the potential to inadvertently kill itself due to being one of the few mobs dumb enough to let itself fall off a cliff. Then there's the aggressive panda, who not only retaliates more often and effectively, but also remains hostile to the player until they either die or move far enough away to escape its detection range. Ultimately, there's more incompetent pandas than competent ones, so the average suffers quite a bit, earning them a spot this low. Next, we have the Endermites. It's a bit telling that this hostile mob ends up being weaker than a few passive ones, but here we are. Endermites are the smallest hostile mob in the game, and have a 5% chance of spawning when a player uses an ender pearl. The problem is that the Endermite spawns at the player's original location, not the spot where the pearl lands, meaning that the player is almost always going to be farther away than its detection range, and usually across terrain features which can't be crossed before they despawn. Speaking of which, they also have a limited time to exist before they despawn, regardless of how close or far the player is, and can only be prevented from despawning through the use of a name tag. To add to this, there's also the fact that the endermen are hostile to endermites, while endermites are not hostile to anything other than the player, who's already long gone. With that in mind, it's no wonder why we have to rank the endermite as the weakest hostile mob. Next is the pufferfish. While their behavior is similar to that of other fish mobs, pufferfish were at one time notable for being the only mob in the game to be classified as defensive. When they're approached by a player or a hostile mob, they inflate to more than double their size and extend their spikes, dealing damage and inflicting poison to any mob that comes into contact with it. Now, this isn't lethal poison, so it can't kill anyone outright, and undead mobs are immune to the effects of poison anyway. But if a player isn't careful, pufferfish can still do a lot of damage. What's more, an unpuffed pufferfish is incredibly small and can be difficult to spot, meaning that you might not be aware one is nearby until it's too late. Still, it's a passive mob at its core, so it's not that big of a threat on its own. Besides, any mob that can be bested by a bucket isn't gonna get a spot too high on this list anyway. In a similar vein, we next have the bees. In addition to being one of the most useful mobs, thanks to their honey, bees are also notable for being one of the most volatile, since harvesting that honey is a lot more complicated than it should be. Without the smoke from a campfire, which itself can be a danger to both players and bees, attempting to harvest honey will anger any bees nearby, turning them hostile so that they sting the player. However, like with actual bees, this costs them their stinger, which will slowly kill them in return, which does keep them from ranking any higher. And considering the fact that they swarm, which admittedly makes them a bit more of a significant force, this means that the entire population will be wiped out with a single hit. Bet that one honeycomb will really come in handy, huh? Our next spot goes to the Axolotls. Okay, admittedly, Axolotls are only really cute if you happen to be a player. Anything else and these things are a nightmare. They attack just about every other aquatic mob in sight, aside from turtles, dolphins, and frogs. And in a large enough group, they can be borderline impossible to deal with. After sustaining significant damage, Axolotls play dead so that other mobs de-aggro on them while they regenerate their health before rejoining the fight. Furthermore, they also give their allies a regeneration effect, as well as removing mining fatigue in order to allow the player to fight alongside them a lot more effectively. Additionally, they can actually function on land and is able to survive out of water for a lot longer than other aquatic mobs. That being said, the Axolotls' aggressive nature can actually cause it more trouble than it's worth, since it attracts the attention of stronger mobs, such as drowned and guardians that it cannot handle on its own. Let's take a look at another group entry with the wolves, dolphins, and polar bears. These three rank together mainly due to them having similar behavioral patterns. When left alone, they are neutral to the player, but when one is attacked, all of them gang up on whoever attacked them. One on their own is nothing too tough, but a large pack of them can be a problem. Of these three, the wolves would have to be the weakest, but they also have the advantage of being tameable and fighting alongside a player, giving it an edge in utility. Polar bears are also the strongest, not only in terms of health and attack strength, but also in being more dangerous in general. They attack any players who get too close to a polar bear cub, making it tricky to be anywhere near large groups of them. Next, we have the goats. What pushes these capricious caprids this high is mainly due to one reason: the RNG. There's almost no telling when or to whom a goat becomes hostile, as their targeting program is mostly timer-based and randomly determined. Once they have a target, they will ram at it, dealing minor damage and knocking them at least 9 blocks away. The problem being that the goats spawn exclusively in mountains, meaning that there's a fairly high chance of them knocking their target off a cliff and dealing a fatal amount of fall damage on top of this. That being said, if they aren't attacking, they act like passive mobs, meaning that they don't retaliate against other entities that attack them. Coming in at a whopping 6 spots above our last hostile mob, we have the Silverfish. Despite being among the weaker enemies in the game, Silverfish have the element of surprise and numbers on their side. They have the ability to infest nearby blocks, hiding away until their hiding place or an adjacent block is broken, at which point they will attack the unsuspecting player, which will almost certainly leave at least a little damage behind. What's more, unless they're taken out in a single hit, damaging one Silverfish causes all the others in the area to leave their hiding places and attack the player en masse, which makes them much more difficult. Still, they're fairly weak mobs, so this isn't too likely to happen, unless you're trying to do a challenge run where you kill everything with a hoe or something. Next, we have the snow golems. While the novelty of a snowman wearing a jack-o'-lantern is interesting, you might be better off saving those resources for something else. Sure, they have a projectile attack and will go after any nearby hostile mobs, but these projectiles don't deal any damage and only have minor knockback. They can be made to deal damage in Bedrock Edition exclusively, and only with a specific setup that requires snowballs to be thrown through flowing lava. What's more, they can make creepers a much more annoying problem than they already were, as their snowballs can cause them to blow up and destroy builds, even without the player being nearby or having a chance to prevent it. Still, there are some uses for the snow golems, such as crowd control and juggling enemies' attention, so we'll give them some credit at least. Alright, let's talk about the llamas. For the record, this does include trader llamas in case you were wondering, which is something we shouldn't really have to clarify, to be honest. Anyway, they are best used as beasts of burden, being able to be outfitted with chests to be used as portable storage. They can be ridden, but if that's what you're looking for, you're better off with a horse or a donkey instead. What sets them apart from similar mobs is the fact that they actually fight back when attacked, spitting projectile attacks to any player or mob that hurts them or the wandering trader they spawn with. This ability to fight back and the fact that it's a projectile attack gives them quite a bit of versatility on this list. Our next spot goes to the villagers and wandering traders. Admittedly, this one is a bit speculative since they aren't actually shown to be strong at all in-game. However, trading with them reveals that they are a lot more potent than they let on. At higher levels, villagers are capable of offering items of considerable power and rarity that often require great effort and luck in order to obtain. This includes, but is not limited to, ender pearls, diamond equipment, enchanted books and equipment, tipped arrows, and even maps leading to ocean monuments and woodland mansions. Wandering traders' offering are less impressive overall, but they can offer items that are hard to come by in the player's current biome, which does come in handy at times. However, they have some defensive advantage over the villagers in actual gameplay, in that they spawn with 2 trader llamas and have potions for invisibility to avoid hostile mobs during the night. Next, we have the zombified piglins. Zombies are dangerous and piglins are dangerous, yet combining them in a mob is less threatening than either of its parts. Okay, if you attack them, they will swarm you like nobody's business and make your life a living nether. But for the most part, as long as you leave them alone, they leave you alone. The only other notable thing is that non-zombified piglins will panic at the presence of a zombified one. However, even then, zombified piglins don't do anything to them, so this is basically just profiling. Next, we have the spiders. Being so ubiquitous, spiders have an edge simply to the sheer number of them you'll be fighting in a typical survival game. While not as prominent as zombies or skeletons, they're still one of the basic enemy mobs that can spawn in just about any biome. Yeah, we said enemy mobs, not hostile mobs, since spiders are actually classified as neutral mobs. They don't attack players at a light level of 12 and above, unless they're attacked first. Granted, they only spawn at a light level of 0, so that's usually not a problem. But once daylight comes, they're basically harmless. Cave spiders are more dangerous due to their aggression and poison damage, but they also need a lower light level to make harmless, requiring only a light level of 8 or higher to be made neutral. Not too far from their zombified cousins, we find the piglins. Similarly, piglins will leave the player alone for the most part and will even barter with the player for some gold ingots, giving them some rare items in exchange. However, this comes with the explicit caveat in that the player has to be wearing at least 1 piece of gold armor for them to remain neutral. Otherwise, they will attack the player all at once, and with both swords and crossbows at their disposal, they can be difficult to deal with. Still, with a little preparation, they can be ignored for the most part, so we can't place them higher than this. Our next spot goes to slimes and magma cubes. Exactly how dangerous these things are depends almost exclusively on how big they are. Larger size means more damage and more hits they can take. Additionally, rather than dying outright, they split into smaller versions of themselves upon being defeated, and with large numbers, they can get out of hand quickly. However, the combination of these things ends up being more neutral than anything, since as they get smaller, they get weaker and more fragile. The smallest slimes are even too weak to actually hurt the player, making them effectively harmless. Magma cubes are slightly stronger in general, but they can still be defeated easily with just a little bit of caution. Next, we have zombies and zombie analogs. As the most basic and straightforward hostile mob, zombies can be dealt with easily just by being careful. However, their durability can make them a problem in large numbers, particularly during an outbreak. And if they spawn as a baby, their speed and small stature can make fighting them difficult as well. The zombie variants don't really mess with this formula too much either. Zombie villagers are completely identical to the standard zombies, only with the option of being able to cure them into becoming regular villagers. Husks are also similar, save for their attacks being able to inflict hunger on their targets. The only one that gets somewhat experimental is the drowned, which is not only capable of swimming, but can also use tridents on rare occasions. What's more, they're also the only hostile aquatic mobs outside of ocean monuments, technically making them the most dangerous mob in most of the ocean biomes. Still, even then, they're just about as easy to take down as the other zombies, save for needing a shield for dealing with their tridents. To get the requisite "oh man" out of the way, let's talk about the creepers. A strong contender for the most annoying mob in all of gaming, it's a bit surprising that the creepers don't rank higher than this. Their explosions can be lethal, even when playing on easy difficulty at full health. and they can easily destroy structures and farms when blown up in the wrong place. However, once they go off, well, that's it for them. You don't even need to kill them since they off themselves to attack. And since their explosions can easily be blocked with a shield or triggered early with a flint and steel, they can be easy to work around as long as you see them coming. Granted, that's not always the case, but it's enough to keep us from ranking them too high. Next are the archers. This includes the skeletons and strays, obviously, but we're also lumping the pillagers in this entry as well. In either case, their arrows give them a huge advantage in range combat, making approaching them difficult without a shield. Granted, that shield basically invalidates their attack strategy, since you can reflect their own arrows back at them. But if there's a lot of them, there's only so much shielding you can do. This is exemplified with skeleton spawners and pillager raids, where you can easily find yourself overwhelmed if you're not prepared. Next, we have the witches. If you're able to get the jump on these witches, they can be dealt with easily. If you can't get the first hit in, they can be one of the most deadly mobs you can come across. They have an infinite amount of potions and splash potions, which can be used for both offense and defense. They can heal themselves indefinitely while making themselves immune to drowning and fire damage. And with a single splash potion of poison, they can bring the player down to a single hit point in a matter of seconds, regardless of armor or difficulty level. Still, with enough speed and or range, they can be taken care of while they try to heal themselves before they can do anything else. Alright, the next one's gonna be odd, but let's talk about chicken jockeys and spider jockeys. Objectively, they're the same as the basic zombies and skeletons respectively. However, there are a few key differences which ranks them above their base forms. For one thing, while they ride chickens, it's the baby zombie that controls the jockey's movement, including its speed being faster than the other chickens. What's more, in both cases, while they are technically one mob, they're treated as separate mobs, each with their own health bars and hitboxes. This can make it difficult to target the one you need to take out, resulting in a more difficult fight all around. Next, we're gonna go with the wither skeletons. While they are unquestionably skeletons, they never use bows, unless they were spawned with a command that specifically allows them to do so. Instead, they rely on melee attacks with a sword, similar to zombies and some piglins. What pushes them above the other similar mobs is that their attacks inflict the wither condition, an effect similar to lethal poison, which also comes with the downside of blacking out the player's health bar, preventing them from easily seeing how much they have left. This makes the wither condition one of the most dangerous effects in the game, and the fact that it's mostly exclusive to the wither skeletons makes them a much bigger threat than most others. Since we're on the subject of tall, dark, and handsome, let's cover the endermen. While they are technically neutral mobs, it really doesn't take much to get them into hostile territory. All you have to do is look at them and they instantly get aggressive, teleporting over and attacking the player without warning. The fact that they can teleport is both an offensive and defensive advantage, since they can both attack unpredictably and dodge projectiles. What keeps them from placing any higher is the fact that they are weak to water, taking damage when in water, as well as when it's raining. This gives the player a way to escape if they happen to be pursued by an attacking enderman by diving into a nearby body of water. Next, we have fiery foes with blazes and the ghast. These mobs are almost single-handedly responsible for making the nether, well, a living hell. Blazes are the most tolerable of the two due to their comparative rarity, as well as being a necessary evil due to their blaze rods being critical items for players. Ghasts, on the other hand, spawn just about anywhere, often float well out of range for attacks, and worst of all, can destroy nearby blocks and bridges with their fireballs. They can have their own fireballs knocked back at them, which does kill them instantly. But considering how difficult this is to actually pull off, you're much better off getting an enchanted bow before you even set foot in the nether. Our next entry is also odd, with the skeleton horsemen. We've already covered both the skeletons and the skeleton horses individually, but putting them together results in something completely different. They only spawn from a skeleton trap horse during a lightning storm, where they attack the player in groups of 4, which is already a hard enough fight when it's normal skeletons. However, while regular skeletons only occasionally wear armor, and even more rarely have enchanted equipment, skeleton horsemen always spawn with full iron armor, and both that and their bows are also enchanted. Add that to the skeleton horses making them significantly faster and harder to hit, and they become one of the hardest non-raid fights you can find on the surface of the overworld. Next, we have the vindicators and the piglin brutes. Compared to other mobs, these two are tougher in both health and attack power, especially the Piglin brute, which has one of the largest non-boss health bars in the game. However, the main reason why they rank so high is that their weapon of choice is the axe, which gives them the ability to disable shields, combined with their durability and high attack power, and they can even be a problem one-on-one. And since they mainly only appear during raids or in locations with multiple enemies, they rarely battle one-on-one as it is, so they almost always have some sort of backup to make things harder. For our last neutral mob, we have the Iron Golems. Speaking of high health and attack power, few mobs are capable of matching that of the Iron Golems. Whether they are player constructed or naturally spawned, they can take a ridiculous amount of damage before falling, and can deal lethal or near lethal to almost any mob they attack. They don't normally attack the player unless they are attacked first or if the player has a bad reputation in the village. Let that be a lesson to you: treat people with respect, or they might send the giant automation of death to kill you. Next is another group of similar foes, with the Hoglands, Zoglins, and the Ravagers. Similarly to our last group entry, these are a set of above-average mobs in terms of both health and damage output. But what these add to the mix is the fact that they are extremely resistant to knockback. Most enemies, you can deal with them by juggling them with the knockback of your attacks, allowing you to deal with them without taking damage. However, here, that's not an option, since the knockback is so minuscule, meaning that they're just as likely to hit you back before you have the chance to recover. And since they often deal more damage than the player, they're going to require more forethought than the average mob. Looks like it's past your bedtime because we've got Phantoms. If there was ever a reason to sleep through every night, Phantoms would be it. They only spawn during the night after staying up 3 nights straight or longer, flying high in the sky and swooping down only long enough to attack. While they aren't as strong or durable as some of our more recent entrants, they make up for that with their sheer numbers, particularly when staying up for several days in a row. It's very easy to get overwhelmed with large numbers of them, especially when they remain well out of range to fight back against them. Missing out in the top 5, we have the Evokers and the Vexes. Previously, we only grouped mobs together if they were similar enough that we could talk about both at once. Here though, they're basically mutually exclusive mobs, since the Vexes can generally only be summoned by the Evokers. Anyway, their offensive power as a unit is incredible, with the Evokers summoning Vexes and aiding them with powerful magic while avoiding counterattacks. The Vexes, in turn, fly all at once, attacking just about everything in sight, even being able to fly through solid walls. If left unchecked, they can easily win a raid entirely on their own, making dealing with them a top priority. Our next spot goes to the scourge of the end cities, the Shulkers. As one of the last mobs you're likely to come across, it makes sense that the Shulkers would end up near the top of our list. They have near impenetrable shells that protect them from attacks until they open up to attack. An attack which involves shooting projectiles which can home into their target and pathfind their way around obstacles. And while the attack doesn't do much damage on its own, it inflicts the levitation effect on the target, causing them to float upwards while the Shulker continues to fire round after round, causing them to float higher. And as we know, what goes up must come down, and after that much floating, the fall is pretty much guaranteed to be lethal. Next, we have the rulers of the ocean monuments with the Guardians and Elder Guardians. To start with, they only appear deep underwater, obviously, meaning that the player is always in danger of drowning if they aren't careful. What's more, you basically need a loyalty-enchanted trident to fight them, since their spines counter direct attacks, and arrows don't work as well underwater. As if that wasn't bad enough, their own attacks are basically unavoidable underwater, and inflict the mining fatigue effect, which makes both getting away and exploring the monument borderline impossible. And getting rid of the mining fatigue with some milk comes with the caveat of also removing any water-breathing effect the player has as well, making it a lose-lose situation. The only reason why they don't rank any higher than this is because our top 3 are simply in a league of their own. Our bronze medal of strength goes to the strongest constructed mob, the Wither. Being one of the true bosses of the game, the Wither is basically a combination of all the worst mobs in the Nether. It has immense strength and health like the Piglin brutes, flies high in the sky like the Ghast, spits projectiles like the Blazes, and even inflicts wither effect like the Wither skeletons used to make. What's more, both it and its projectiles explode with an explosion strength higher than anything else in the game, capable of destroying everything that isn't explicitly bedrock reinforced deep state or an end portal. This makes the Wither the only entity other than the player that is capable of destroying obsidian. What's more, after dropping below 50% health, it gains a special armor that makes it immune to projectile attacks, forcing the player to get up close to it to deal damage. As the icing on the cake, when it kills another mob, it plants a wither rose on the block where it stood. A small flower which damages any mob that comes into contact with it, as if fighting this thing wasn't hard enough. The silver medal goes to the Warden. It's hard to determine how dangerous the Warden will be since it's still in development. However, from everything we've seen thus far, it all points to it being one of the scariest mobs in the game, having the highest health bar, the greatest movement speed, and an attack strength that can one-shot almost any other mob. Fighting the Warden seems impossible. It's capable of winning one-on-one against almost every other mob, including the Wither and all of its frustrating tactics. It even has an attack which is able to ignore shields, armor, Wither armor, and even solid walls, and is able to inflict heavy damage barring a powerful resistance effect being applied. The only reason why the Warden isn't our #1 spot is because it can be avoided fairly easily. It's completely blind, only relying on its sense of hearing to detect targets. And if it can't find such a target, it will despawn after some time, allowing the player to avoid dealing with it. Plus, there's still one other mob that even the Warden can't handle. Our gold medal of strength goes to the Ender Dragon. While she doesn't have as much health as the previous two entrants, the Ender Dragon easily makes up for it with her battle prowess. She's the only mob in the game that requires actual tactics to defeat, as she's basically invulnerable as long as the 10 end crystals atop the obsidian pillars remain intact. Said crystals are often protected by iron bars, requiring the player to be either extremely precise or to build their way up the pillar to destroy the bars and the crystal. Even without the healing from the crystals, however, the Ender Dragon is still by far the most resilient mob in the whole game, being immune to all status effects, and only being hurt by explosions and player attacks. This means that the Ender Dragon could single-handedly take on every other mob all at once and beat them all, since they would be completely unable to deal damage. The Wither and the Warden are certainly strong, but in a fight against the Ender Dragon, they wouldn't stand a chance. Because of this, we fittingly give the final boss the title of the strongest mob in all of Minecraft. Alright guys, that's the list. What do you think? Let us know if you agree. And if you need a one-up, be sure to hit that notification bell and binge our Weak to Powerful playlist, where we break down the strength of the characters in your favorite games. Thanks for watching.